All right. So the Mishnah today addresses three different cases. So I'm gonna read it in the Aramaic. The Mishnah is actually generally in Hebrew, and then the Talmud is actually Aramaic, but it's sort of like a Hebrew-sized Aramaic, and so there's, often when you understand Hebrew, you can understand the Aramaic as well. So beit kor afar. So we're going to now change the topic, and we're now going to say, okay, we had conditions about money, but now let's take a look about conditions about land. And so a beit kor, it's about 4 acres is my estimation of land. So I have that amount of land. So what's the conclusion? Harezu Mekudeshes. So now, by the way, on the first page of English, if you want to follow with me, I am at the Mishnah near the bottom of the page. And I'm going to be reading, again, the Aramaic and then the English, again, just mostly in order to enable you to follow along with me. So they're married. She's betrothed to him, provided that he has provided that he has the quantity of land that he described. So al manashe yeshli b'makom ploni. Now he says, not only do I have it, but I have it in this particular place. So im yeshlo ba'oto makom mekudeshes v'im lav eno mekudeshes. If he has it in that particular place, he's going to be married. And if he's not, so if he doesn't, so then they're not going to be married. It's a condition, right? If the condition is fulfilled, so then he's married. If it's not, then he's not. So now I'm going to show you that amount of land. Again, we're going to understand this, as we'll see in the Gemara itself, that it means I'm going to show you the amount of land and I actually own it. Well, then and Rashi tells us, this is where Rashi is so beautiful, because if you just translate the words, it just means if he shows it to her in the plain, she's not married. But who owns that land? And so Rashi explains that here we're talking about land that he doesn't own. He doesn't own the land that he's showing her, and then they're not going to be married, because she is going to understand his commitment to that he's going to show her land as meaning he's going to show her the land that he owns. So now we flip to the next English page. And so now the Gemara is going to presume that in case number 1, the owner proves his ownership, by bringing witnesses. So the Gemara wonders what happens if he doesn't have witnesses. Now, we saw yesterday that if he doesn't have witnesses in connection with cash, we're going to be worried that maybe he does have that money in some bank account that nobody knows about, and that's why he can't bring witnesses to prove it. But what about land? Do we say the same thing with respect to land, or do we assume that land is more better known? And we're going to see we say the same thing. So the Gemara asks, maybe we should worry that maybe he has the land and he just doesn't have the ability to bring witnesses to prove that he has the land. So Tanya, and we have actually a brisa, and I realized that I didn't mention this, but it was on the screen, but I forgot to mention it. And that is that when the Mishnah was codified, there were many, many statements that were made by rabbis at the same time that were not included, and they are often referred to in the English text here as a brisa, basically an additional text that was not formally included in the Mishnah, and often we ask questions from them. Now, if in fact there's a conflict, we'll usually go with the text that was codified by Rabbi Judah the Prince, who was codified the text of the Talmud in roughly 200 CE, text of the Mishnah in roughly 200 CE. But in general, if there's a possible way to show that those earlier statements are actually consistent with one another, we're going to try and do that. And so here, the question is, we not only that, we have we have a brisa that says that even that where we're talking about is chayshinan shema yeshlo. We do worry that maybe he has this other land somewhere and is just unable to prove it. So lo kasha, it's not actually a debate between the brisa and our Mishnah. Our Mishnah is asking the question and answering the question, is there a definitive marriage? And the answer is yes, if he can prove it, no, if he cannot. But it is not actually answering a second question of, would there be an uncertain marriage, meaning a marriage of possibility and where we don't know the answer. And the answer is that in fact, the brisa that says that we do worry about it tells us that in fact, we do consider there to be some level of marriage. She's not free to marry whomever she wants. She's forced to have to get a divorce if she wants to marry somebody else. Okay, so that's the first question and answer that the Talmud asks. So now the question is, because we learned, you have a question? Yeah, please.
I'm embarrassed about my own lack of knowledge here, but I'm assuming that both parties in this case, for this to apply, I have to be Jewish.
Yes. The answer to that question is yes, but it isn't really relevant to the debate that we're having at the moment. Meaning the Talmud elsewhere says that the marriage process that we're talking about is a marriage process. There is a separate marriage process between any two people, but that marriage process doesn't have the Kiddushin step. So it goes straight to the connection step and doesn't have the sanctification a step of saying that we are going to be selfless to one another on some level. So there is marriage, but it doesn't follow the same rules. But that's a good question. And so again, the question was, does this only apply to Jews? And so, okay, so now we made the same point yesterday, and this is how, again, the Talmud is always referencing. And indeed, one of the complicated aspects of the Talmud is often you need to know the entire Talmud to understand any of the Talmud. And so here, the Talmud is referencing the question that we asked yesterday, and it says, so lama lila misne gabi ara, why did we need to teach this rule at all with respect to land? After all, velama lila misne gabi zuze, and why did I need to teach it connecting to money? Meaning, why not just tell it to us once? You can either tell us it about land or you could tell it to us about money, but you should be able to learn one from the other. And so the Gemara answers no, we actually need to teach both because, so sricha, we actually need both of them. And again, we're in the bottom, near the bottom of the first column of 60b4. Because if we had just taught it in connection with money, money is hideable, and a person may actually want to hide their money, their liquid resources, and it's because they don't want other people to collect it from them. And so as a result, maybe it's only there that if you don't have it, if you don't have witnesses to prove it, we're worried that maybe you do have it, you just have it under your mattress. About ara, ema is the islay ara. Kala Islam. Maybe when it comes to land, we would be worried that in fact land has a voice associated with it. There's a land records, and indeed there's an assumption throughout the Talmud that when you do a transaction involving land, that it has a more well-known aspect to it. So Kamash Malan. So as a result, the Talmud needed to teach us both. Okay. So now, the Gemara here does not actually explain why teaching about land alone would not be enough. And here's where the commentaries all come in. And Rashi here explains that without both, I might have thought that land is not treated exactly like money. Again, land is something that's more publicly known, but it comes to teach us by teaching it in connection with both land and money that it's treated the exact same way. Okay, so now we turn to the second of our cases in the Mishnah. And again, the second case in our Mishnah was the one that where the man says he has the land in a particular location. And the Gemara asks, so first we quote the part of the Mishnah. Often the Talmud does that. It quotes a piece of the Mishnah, and then it goes on to expand on it. So we said in our Mishnah that if in fact he has it in the location where he promised they're going to be married, and if not, then they're not. Well, Pshita, that's obvious. Why did you even need to tell us that? That's like not really necessary. So Ma'udatema, Amrullah, my nafka lachmina. He's really saying to her, here's why we need to have this law, because I might have thought that what should she care where the land is located? After all, she should care that he has it. And if it is in some other location, it shouldn't make a difference. So, Ana Tarchana Umaisina, I'm going to go and work and bring it to the location that I said. So why should we even be worried about it? And so the answer is Kamash Malan, that in fact we are concerned about that. We don't want the wife has the right to know where the land is located, and if in fact it's going to take extra work for her husband to bring it to her, she should and may care about that, and therefore we have to be concerned about it. Okay, so now the Talmud turns to case number 3 in the Mishnah, where the man says that he will show land of a certain size. So I'm going to show land of a particular size. So Tana, we learned in a brisa, again, the concept is we're talking about he's committing to show his own. It's not enough for him to show Omar's land as opposed to, and I'm sorry for picking on you. So it's not enough. So Gabi Hektish Tnan, and so now we're going to I'm sorry. So now the Gemara asks, well, the im hera bevika ena b'keshes. Now, we've said that if he shows somebody else's land, they're not married. Well, again, we've got the principle; it's got to be his land. So Pshita, the Gemara asks, it's obvious. So lo tzrika denakif b'dis Torah. That the issue is that, again, what happens if instead of it being his land, he's the one who's working it as a sharecropper? Is that considered his land or not? And so the Gemara answers here that it's not considered his land. That if essentially if he's chosen to work a particular piece of land, then that's not enough of an ownership interest to hold it. And this really highlights another wonderful aspect of the Talmud, and that is we in modern thought have a clear understanding of sort of the many pieces of ownership. Those pieces of ownership date back at least to this, and I'm sure in other traditions as well, date back a long time. And so as a result, here we see that the ability to work and have a piece of the profit associated with a piece of land is not sufficient. Okay, so now we turn next to the following issue. So the Gemara is going to turn to issues that arise associated with calculating the amount of land someone owns. Meaning, what if I have a land, I say that I've got land that can produce a certain amount, but it turns out that I have land that size, but it doesn't actually have the ability to produce. It's all rocky. It's terrible land. So what gets counted in that regard? Now, in order to evaluate that issue, we're going to look at 2 other legal topics. Legal topic number 1 is if I make a commitment to donate the value of a piece of property that I have to the temple. Okay, this is something that was viewed as something that would happen on a regular basis. Very end of Leviticus deals with this particular issue. And the question is, and we actually say that there's a holiness associated with having made that commitment. That when you commit to make that kind of contribution, you've actually sanctified the land in some manner. And you can see you can hear the connection between hekdesh, which has the same root, kuf daled shin, as kiddushin, as marriage, because both of them involve some level of sanctification. So the Gemara, so in particular, when will irregularities in the land result in parts of the land not counting towards determining whether the man owns the claimed amount of land? So we're first going to look at that in connection with donations to the temple, then we're going to look at it in connections with sale transactions, and then we're going to answer our question. So Gabi Hektish Tana, when it came to the sanctification of the land in order to contribute it to the temple, so now we turn to 61A1. We finally have gotten to the page that is for today. So if you consecrate it during the time that the Jewish people celebrated Yovel, Yovel was a method of returning land to its original owner. There was a sense that an equalization method that in order to avoid anyone getting too wealthy or too poor, that after every 50 years, land would revert to the families that it owned it originally. And so when this ruling that it said would apply during that period of time, and that was whenever there was a majority of the Jewish people lived in the land of Israel. So noting bezerah chomer seorim chamishim shekel kesef. So the Bible says at the end of Leviticus that in fact you have to give 50 silver coins for every chomer. That's about 30 bushels of produce that the land can produce. So, hayu nikaim amukim asarat tefachim. What if there are crevices in the land that are 10 handbreadths deep? So, oslam gavom asarim tefachim, or there are rocks that are 10 tefachim high, that are 10 handbreadths high. Ein nimdadanima. That does not get counted with the overall land in order to determine how much land you've given. But if it's less than that, then it gets counted. So again, we've now determined that there's a way of saying what gets included if I say I have a field and I'm donating it to the temple. So the Havinanba, and we asked about that. Yet I understand that it's not going to be considered sanctified together, but we should at least count some level of value associated with those crevices and rocks. And if you want to say, well, maybe it's because it isn't, those crevices don't aggregate to a sufficient size, lo chashiv, that, and therefore it's not considered important enough to be counted. Urminu, I'll show that there's a Braita, again another era Mishnaic era text that says sadeh, that when we have in the Bible that it says a field, Ma'al with Lomer, what does it come to teach us that it refers to a field? Why does it call it a field as opposed to just land? So Lafishin Emar, Zera Chomer Seorim B'Chamishim, it's to tell us that if you give an amount of land that produces 30 bushels, you have to pay 50 silver coins. I might only have thought that it was that size that matters. And the answer is, how do I know that smaller amounts get also covered? So tirkav, v'chatzi tirkav, a tirkav size and half a tirkav size, about filu rova and even a quarter, meaning how do I know that even smaller size, minayin, how do I know that? Talmud lomer sadeh mikoma. So it comes to teach us that any field of any size, that is going to have the rule. So as a result, why don't, the Gemara's asking, why don't we count the crevices towards the value of the donation that you need to make? Meaning, even if the crevices aren't worth the full amount, they should be worth something. So as we turn to 61a2, so the Talmud answers, Amar Mar Ukva Bar Chama, he answers, Mar Ukva says, Hacha b'nikayim mileim mayim askin. We're talking about crevices that were filled with water. And so as a result, they don't produce any volume of produce, and therefore they are truly considered worthless. So now the good Talmud asks, so, and Dekanami, we can actually, and so Mishum Delav B'nei Zriya Ninu, they're not able to produce food, planting, so that therefore they're not going to count. And Dekanami, and we can actually infer that to Katani because the Mishnah teaches, Dumya de Salayim Gavom. It's like rocks that are high up, and just as rocks can't be used to plant, so too you can't plant in these locations, in these crevices. So Shmamina, so we've in fact inferred that that's the case. But now the Talmud asks, well, 1 second, why does it matter whether it's 10 tfachim, when it's 10 handbreadths? Why shouldn't even smaller crevices, if they're filled with water, they can produce? And if their rocks are smaller than 10 tfachim, they can't produce. Why should they get included? And so the answer is, Hanu de Aramikri, Shidra de Aramik. That the point is that when you have the so Hanu Nagne de Aramikri and Shadra de Aramikri, that when it comes to the crevices, they're just called like basins of the land, and when it comes to the rocks, they're called the spines of the land, meaning that they're basically they're de minimis. That's considered a de minimis thing. And so as a result, it's all part of the same field. And so as a result, it doesn't need to get treated separately. And it's understood that on some level, there's a waiver with respect to that. And again, an issue that you see that we have. I apologize that I did not scroll my screen at the same time. Okay, so now what about, so that's the law with respect to making something sanctified to donate it to the temple. If in fact we have anything that doesn't produce, then we're not going to count it. But if it does produce, we'll count it as a part of the gift. But what about if we do a sale? So in a sale, we have a different rule. Gabi mecher tanan, ha'omer lechaveru beis kor afar ani mocher lecha. I'm going to sell you this amount of field. V'hayu sham nikayim amukim asara tvachim oslam gavoim asarim tvachim. And there turned out that there are crevices or rocks that are in the field that are 10 handbreadths wide. So we're not going to include them. They don't get included in the size of the field. So of the real estate that's being sold. So pachomikan, but if it's less than that, then they do get included in the overall field. Amar Mar Ukva, and Mar Ukva explained that in this case, when it comes to the sale of property as opposed to the donation of property, even if they are not filled with water, they're not going to be counted because well, that's what we're going to ask. So my timer, why is that the case? So Rav Papa explains, Lefisha ein adam rotze sheyitin et ma'otav b'sadeh achat v'yira'eh lo kishnayim yucha shloshes makomot. When you buy a field, you don't want to have effectively 2 fields or 3 fields. You want to have one continuous field. And if you have a crevice or a rock that is 10 handbreadths in size, you effectively have 2 fields or 3 fields. It's going to interrupt. You can't just get on your lawnmower and, or tractor and till the whole thing together. It's going to be more difficult for you. So you don't want that to be counted in your effort. And so as a result, now we have 2 different approaches. One approach, when it comes to the donation to the temple, says that if it is capable of producing produce, then it has value and we count it towards the value. And it's only when it's filled with water that we don't count it. And then the second, when it deals with a sale, it doesn't make a difference whether or not you can use produce. It separates it and means that it's worth less as an overall property, and therefore it won't count even if it's not filled with water. So which approach do we take here? So hachamai, what's the case here? So lehektish medamin law, olamecher medamin law. Do we compare it to a case of sanctification or a case of sale? And mistabra lehektish medamin law. In the end, we're going to say it's like the sanctification. Why? To amar law, because the man can tell the woman, listen, tarchana v'zarana umaisina. Yes, I may now have to go around the rock, but that's an amount of work that I'm willing to do. And therefore, don't worry, I've got enough land. When I say I have a beit core, it can count even the crevices as long as they're able to produce some level of production. Okay, so that has given us the ability to get to the next Mishnah. And so now the next Mishnah is going to back up. We've been talking about conditions, and we're talking about conditions associated with marriage. But this is the location in the Talmud where we're going to say, what does a condition have to look like in order to be a true condition? And we're going to see that there's a debate associated with a story in the Bible. During the Exodus, when the Jewish people were about to enter the land of Israel, so they, 2 of the tribes come forward and say, you know what? We don't really want to cross the Jordan. We want our share of the land to be here on the eastern side of the Jordan River because it's very fertile and we have a large flock, and this is where we want to go. Well, Moses didn't take kindly to that, and he's like, We just had 40 years ago an incident where the spies came and discouraged the Jewish people from wanting to enter the land. And as a result, that entire generation was wiped out. And we had to wait until another 40 years in order to be able to enter the land of Israel. And here now you're going to once again say that you don't want to go into the land? That's terrible. And so they say to him, no, 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 we're going to go in and we're going to even lead the fighting when you in the land, but when we divide it up, we want to come back over to this side. And so Moses says, okay, and he makes a two-part condition. He says, if the children of God and the children of Reuben cross the Jordan and fight, then they will be given the land they wanted on the eastern side of the Jordan. If they do not cross the Jordan with the Jewish people, then they will inherit in your midst in the land of Canaan. So that's a two-part condition. First, he says, if yes, right, if this thing happens, and then he says, if this thing does not happen. And so that's an important aspect. And so with this background, now we're ready to get into the debate. So Rabbi Meir says in the Mishnah, Rabbi Meir Omer, Kol tanai she'enu k'tanai b'nei Gad u'b'nei Ruvain enu k'tanai. You need to, if you're going to make a condition, you need that condition to have the same kind of two parts, just like the condition that existed at the time when the Jewish people were entering the land. So again, the same two parts that I mentioned, those are the two parts here. And by the way, we're on 61A3 now. So Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel Omer, so Rabbi Chanina disagrees, and he says, Tzarach hadavar la'omro. Actually, we needed both lines of this conditional statement. It wasn't sufficient to just say, if this, then that. We also needed, and if not this, then a third thing. So, because if I had told you that if we just had the first statement, and I'll put the statement on the screen, right? If the children of God and the children of Reuben cross the Jordan and fight, then they will be given the land they wanted on the eastern side of the Jordan. What is the implication of that if they don't? If we just had that statement, what would be the implication? And so, according to Rabbi Chanina, at this moment, in the Mishnah's history, we're saying that the implication is maybe they would get nothing. Maybe they wouldn't get anything in the land of Israel, and they wouldn't get anything on the eastern bank of the Jordan either. And so as a result, for Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel, there is no requirement to double a condition. You only need to say the full aspects of whatever it is that you're trying to say. And if, in fact, the implication of your first part of a condition is sufficient to cover you, well, then you're fine. So now the Talmud is going to continue that conversation. So Shaper Ka'amar Le, Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel, Rabbi Meir. It seems like Rabbi Chanina has a good argument. So like, what in the world is Rabbi Meir going to say in response to it? We don't have an answer in the Mishnah. So Amar Lach Rabbi Meir would tell you, Isal Kadaitach Lav L'Tanai Kaful Huda Asa. If in fact we were to say that you didn't want the double, we didn't need the double, we still didn't need the double stipulation, because every word in the Bible matters, and it says Lichtov v'im lo yavru v'nachozu b'tochachem be'eretz Canaan. As we turn to the 61b, Lamali. The question is why did you need to specifically mention, again, I'm going to scroll up to the conditions. Why did you need to mention in the land of Canaan? Why was this language needed to be mentioned? If doubling was necessary, meaning if you only doubled in order to tell you something new, you wouldn't need the words in the land of Canaan. All you would need to say is that, that without, all that they would need to say is here in the land of Canaan. So sorry, this is what I was referring to. So if they do not cross the Jordan with the Jewish people, then they will inherit in your midst. Why did the Bible need to add the words in the land of Canaan? And so wouldn't in the midst naturally mean that they would get the peace everywhere? So the fact that we added the words in the land of Canaan tells us, according to Rabbi Meir, that in fact this second condition wasn't really necessary, and therefore we didn't have to have it. And therefore, since it wasn't necessary, it tells us that if you want to make a true condition in a legal statement, you need to say, if yes, this, then X, and if not this, then Y. That's what Rabbi Meir concludes from this. But now it's the discussion's not over. So Rabbi Chanina says back to him, no. And again, we're on 61b1 now. So Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel Amar, no, ilo kasav Rachmana be'eretz Canaan hava mina v'nachozu b'sochem be'eretz Gilad. I might have thought that the only place that the Jewish people were, that the children of Gad and Reuven would get an inheritance is on the eastern part of the Jordan, and that they would have to share the eastern part of the Jordan with the other 10 tribes. And so it's actually that they would, yes, you might say you have an argument, Rabbi Meir, but it doesn't prove your full point. So, and Rabbi Meir says back, Rabbi Meir, no. Because we said in your midst means wherever you are. The Jewish people would collect on the eastern side of the Jordan, they'd collect on the western side of the Jordan, and the tribes of Gad and Reuven would have to be among all of them in all places. Okay, so we've now had this discussion between them, and so now and actually, so one second. So there's one last piece to continue this discussion. And so we'll go through it, which is Tanya. So again, a brisa continues this discussion. Amar Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel, mashal l'ma davar domeu. How is this? What is this comparable to? L'adam shahaya machalik nechasav levanav. It's comparable to somebody who wants to have his sons inherit property of his. Amar, and he says, Ploni b'nei yirosh sada Ploni. Son number one, you should inherit field number one. Uploni b'nei Yerish Sadeh Plonit, and son number two, you should inherit field number two. And then Uploni B'ni, and now my third son, Yitain Matayim Zuz, the Yerish Sadeh Plonit. I don't know why this third son got such a raw deal, but he has to give 200 zuz in order for him to inherit field number three. The Imlo Yitain, and the condition continues. If he does not give it, Yirash Im Echad B'Shar Nechasim. He'll inherit with his other brothers. So mi garam lo lirash im echav b'shar nechasim. What is it that allows this third child, the third son, to inherit with his other brothers? Kafelu garam lo. It's only because, according to Rabbi Chanina, it's only because I made the additional not statement, meaning I needed to have both the first half of the condition and the second half of the condition in order to accomplish what I'm trying to accomplish. And again, this is consistent with Rabbi Chanina's belief that you don't actually need to have a two-part condition in order to make all conditions valid. You can have a one-part condition, but if you need both parts, you need to say both parts. And here you need both parts. And so that's his argument. So, but one second, that's not analogous to the case in our Mishnah. In our Mishnah, the implication, according to Rabbi Chanina, was that the two tribes would get no land whatsoever in any place. Hasam Katani, Yesh b'mashma sha'afilu baretz Kanan lo yinchalo. They wouldn't get anywhere. So Alma, and we're on 61b2. Alma kafila la'aretz Gilad nami mahani. So, but here it seems that they would get. You're admitting that they would get in the land of Gilad. So v'hakik mi garam lo lirish imechav. But here we've said mi garam imechav b'shar nechasim kafelu garam. So Alma kafelu l'shar nechasim hu demahani. So one second. You are trying to compare this situation of the three sons to the situation in our Mishnah, but those cases are not comparable, because in our Mishnah, the Rabbi Chanina's understanding was that if the two tribes didn't do what they were supposed to do, they'd get nothing. But here in the understanding of this brisa, if the third son didn't do what he was supposed to do, he would get a piece of this land number three. So those are inconsistent. So lo kasha ha makame d'neimale Rabbi Meir ben Achazu ha levaser d'neimale Rabbi Meir ben Achazu. So the answer is that actually we had learned the answer to this question already, because the first piece of the Gemara that we saw after the Mishnah highlighted the fact that what mattered was the words Eretz Canaan, that according to Rebbe Hanina's understanding, the words Eretz Canaan is what told us that the two tribes would get not only in the eastern side of the Jordan, they wouldn't only get a small piece in the eastern side of the Jordan, but they would also get a small piece. They would also get their proportional piece on the western side of the Jordan. And so as a result, it's all consistent. Okay. So now we're going to go through a series of stories in the few minutes that we've got left, a series of stories. And so we're going to go through them quickly, which is a shame because these are some of the best stories. But we're going to now show a few times in the Bible where double conditions are used. So the first of them involves the story of Cain and Abel. And as you may remember, Abel offered a sacrifice that was accepted while Cain's was not. And God tells Cain, if you better yourself, you'll be rewarded. But if you do not better yourself, sin rests at your door. And so let's take a look at it inside. So Bishlam Rebbe Meir Haina Diksiv. Now it makes sense according to Rebbe Meir, who says that you have to always have a double condition. The fact that we have the pasuk in Tetiv Se'ez Ve'im Lo Tetiv that sin's going to rest at your door if you don't better yourself. Because why did you need the second half of that statement? You really didn't need it. So Ela Rebbe Chanina Lamali, why did you need to say it? So Salka Daita Kamina. Actually, Rebbe Chanina would be able to answer this is why you needed it. Im Tetiv Agra, Vim Lo Tetiv Lo Agra, the Velo Dina. I might have thought that if you don't better yourself, so nothing bad will happen. You won't get any reward, but you won't get any punishment either. So Kamash Malan, that actually it matters. And this really teaches a very high, important principle that we see not only here, but elsewhere. And it's true in life in general. If you are growing, if you're acting, if you're active, etc., that's positive. But you might think that I'm just sitting on the couch, I'm not doing anything. What does it matter? The answer is that if you're not growing, if you're not working, if you're not trying to improve yourself, then you're actually falling back. You're actually, something negative is actually happening. So then we have the next story where Abraham sends his servant to find a wife for Abraham's son, Isaac. So here too, the oath had two parts. And so the Gemara, again, asks the same question and it gives the same answer. Given the lack of time, I'm going to go through it very quickly and just on the outside. And the point is that, again, Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel would say the second part was necessary here to clarify a different aspect. That here, the point is that I might have thought that when the servant promises to Abraham that he's going to bring back the wife, maybe it doesn't require everybody's consent, or maybe he could even kidnap the wife. And so as a result, the second statement of Abraham is necessary to tell you that no, I only if the woman and her family consent will we be allowed. And then we'll end with the following, which is at near the end of Leviticus. There are a series of curses, and the curses begin with if in fact if you follow my statutes, then the following things will happen. These blessings will happen. While the curses begin with the God saying, and if you will despise my statutes. So again, why do you need both? Doesn't that support Rebbe Meir's conclusion that every condition needs to say, if yes, if something happens, then X, and if something does not happen, then Y? And the answer, again, Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel would say no, that the second part was necessary to clarify that maybe despising the statutes doesn't result in the absence of a blessing. It results in the absence of a blessing or curse. But now it actually teaches us that it actually does result in a curse. That I might have thought that maybe, again, if we don't do anything, then we're done. But if not, then we've got to move on. So the Gemara now is in the middle of this effort to try and determine whether we follow Rabbi Meir or Rabbi Chanina. Do we need a double condition or not? And if you'd like to hear the conclusion, you're going to need to turn in to tomorrow's daf of Daf Yomi. So I hope you enjoyed. Happy to answer any questions. Need to clear out in order to allow space for the next panel, but really appreciate our ability to learn together. And I'll just conclude by noting that in Jewish tradition, the idea of learning in a prayer for something to happen is a strong one. And so, I hope that the learning that we did today will help be our part in bringing peace to the Middle East. So thank you.